People are often forced to pay bribes or offer sexual favours just to get a job. That's according to the Youth Perceptions and Attitudes Survey done by Corruption Watch. The NGO recently held a webinar on the role of corruption in barring young people from opportunities and employment. Let's chat more about that now with Mzwandile Banjatwa from Corruption Watch. Mzwandile, good morning. Thanks so much for your time. So let's just go back a step back to the actual Youth Perceptions Survey on corruption. Just find out, tell us more about some of those very, very disturbing findings that led to this webinar.
Yeah, so the survey took place last year and was also released last year. It was a survey which sampled around 150,000 young people, 1,500 young people from across the country. And the findings was that, firstly, young South Africans understand what corruption is and the effect that it has on society. But also unemployment, abuse of power, greed, low incomes were also perceived or viewed as major drivers of corruption. So what we've also found is that most young people have also may have committed corrupt acts in the past, but a significant number of them were citing that the only time they would be willing to pay a bribe was when they would be applying for a job. And we've also found that there were evidence of young people being asked for sexual favors in exchange for employment. Now, young people generally do not, unfortunately, trust big businesses and also politicians as well. So the survey, particularly young people, cited the South African police services and local government to be the most corrupt institutions in the country. Now, though a majority of young people, or rather, though a low number of young people have actually confessed to have paid a bribe before, and some saying that unfortunately they would when it comes to employment and job or accessing job opportunities. A large number of these young people actually were more than willing to be part of anti-corruption measures which would be put in place.
Well, Mzwandile, we know, I mean, for a fact that this doesn't only start when these youngsters enter the job market. It goes all the way back to the actual classroom. We've heard the stories of sexual favors for marks, sort of passing as well, just to pass an exam. We know that, and those are the teachers, those are the principals. So that sort of is perpetuated as early as that. So what do we do to help these youngsters? You've held a webinar this week with the Budget Justice Coalition and the National Youth Development Agency. How can we help them? How can we fix this?
So our key focus on this webinar was to sort of find exactly what you're saying. How do we help young people, and how do we make sure that young people, through various programs of government, are able to access services in the most ethical, transparent, and an accountable way? Unfortunately, what we have found is that in most of these programs, which are plenty of them that have been set in place, from the youth employment tax incentives, the skills employment levy, the presidential youth employment initiatives, most young people still can't access these opportunities. And those who do, unfortunately, tend to find themselves back where they have started again. And what we find to be problematic is that when we look at initiatives that are currently underway, we know that the integrated youth development strategy were out for public comment, and subsequently there was a consultative process that was held. We find that corruption doesn't feature at all in that strategy, which is a huge problem. When we look at the National Youth Development as well, in terms of their priorities, corruption, transparency, and accountability don't feature much in those as well. So those are some of the problematic areas that need to be sorted, because it now means that money does go to certain applicants or recipients, but it's hard for those monies to be accounted for. Now, in the past, the NYDA has prided itself on their turnaround and subsequent clean audits that they've been getting. But what we found to be problematic is that we would remember that their loan book was actually written off. We understand that most of the bad debts that were there were actually done away with. But what was problematic and still is problematic now is that most of those monies were not recovered till to date.
All right. Well, the thing is we have, and let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, we have leadership. We have the elders. We have the elders who should know better, who are so steeped in corruption in this country that the question is where or how, who are the people who would actually have to help these youngsters? And I suppose we also have to say, okay, fine, they're paying the bribes, they're getting the jobs, but what's the knock-on effect for 10, 20 years from now where we have people who've had to take this path to actually sort of take important jobs in the country? We also have to look at what if we're sitting at home going, okay, this doesn't actually impact me. It does impact each and every one of us, even though we're not the ones who are in this predicament.
That's very true. And I think another problem is that at the moment you have the National Youth Development Agency, which is in a process of appointing a new board. Unfortunately, that would be a parliamentary undertaking that would translate to political influence, which has happened in the past, so much so that the process has to be restarted 3 times as we speak right now, because there were certain candidates which were questionable. And since there is plenty of political influence in the process, it becomes a huge problem, because it also means that young people are not in those spaces to make decisions that would affect them not only now but also in the future. We know that we have the least number of young parliamentarians, so it becomes very much hard. Even in the consultative process, you don't have people who have political influence to ensure that the needs of young people are met. In that consultative process, through the integrated development strategy, you did not have the Minister of Health, you did not have the Minister of Social Development, neither did you have the Minister in the Department of Women, Youth and People Living with Disabilities. So you wonder whether government does actually take all these undertakings seriously, or it's just a box-ticking exercise for them.
All right, thanks very much for that. Corruption Watch's Mzondile Banjatwa.